What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're going to start the second installment of the H22 preparation for project CB9. We got a lot of maintenance issues we need to work out with this motor before we can go and bolt the 5-speed in position and drop back into project CB9. So let's go ahead and get started. Moving on to the thermostat, we're going to go and replace this, take this 10mm bolt off, and this 10mm off. And this is our thermostat housing assembly. We're going to go ahead and put a new thermostat right in here. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and change out this gasket right here. Here's the part number for that for your reference. And for those wanting an OEM thermostat, here's the part number for that. So let's go ahead and get this stuff put together. Moving on to the next step, this entire intake manifold has to be removed from the H22. This is not compatible for the CB9. First thing, the fuel injectors are rated for an OBD2 controlled system. The CB9 is an OBD1. And the second thing is the fuel oil connection is located right here, whereas the CB9 connection is right here, and it's also a different connector. And we're going to put the F22 onto this H22. And in order to do so, take this hose connector off, take this hose connector off, and there's 5 12mm nuts on the top here, holding on to the block. And there's also 5 here on the bottom of the block. There's one right there, one right here, right there, and another one right there. And then once we have those off, you've got the intake manifold support bracket right here that we need to deal with. So take this 12mm off, and this entire intake manifold assembly should come right off. So let's go ahead and remove this. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the intake manifold that we have to make modifications to. F22 does not go on the H22 engine due to the different bolt pattern and openings. Okay, so to summarize what we're going to do here, we've got the H22 fuel rail here with obviously the old H22 injectors. We're going to pull these old injectors out of the H22 rail. We're going to put these 92 to 96 VTEC fuel injectors into this H22 fuel rail. We have to do this due to the fact that the Prelude fuel rail has the wrong input side for the fuel line. On top of that, these fuel injectors are for OBD2 and they have different connectors. Now, there is a way you can utilize these fuel injectors. You have to rewire the harness and you have to buy a relay, I believe, for the fuel injector capacitor that's on the strut tower. But we're gonna just go ahead, install these rebuilt 9296 H22 VTEC fuel injectors, and then go ahead and put them in the H22 fuel rail and bolt it in position. We also need to reuse the H22 fuel regulator as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and unbolt this fuel pressure regulator with a 10mm right here and another 10mm right down there. And then once I have that off, I can go ahead and take the fuel rail and fuel injector assembly off the H22 manifold with this 10mm right here, another 10 right there, and another 10 right there. And we're gonna use a 3/8 ratchet with a swivel extension. So let's go ahead and start taking this apart. Okay guys, removing this paper intake manifold gasket material from the head itself. I mean, it's just been a long, tedious process. Tried numerous tasks here, looked it up on YouTube, got a helpful tip on one of the comments on one of the videos. So this is what I was trying here. This is a little nylon brush attachment, which is almost like non-abrasive, so it's a little safe for aluminum. So I was trying that, wouldn't remove it. I was trying some brake parts cleaner. following up with a brush wouldn't do it too much. And you don't want to use a regular razor blade on this due to the fact that aluminum is very soft and you can gouge it and cause some air leaks potentially. So I might get some flack for this, but this is what I was successful with. Using Goof Off, I think this container is about, I don't know, $6. And I believe the Permatex gasket remover that has got mixed reviews. I think that's like $12 for that little bottle. So just go get yourself some Goof Off. And this is a dull putty knife right here. I was using this to get most of the material off. And then for the fine, intricate details, I was using this X-Acto knife, which has a straight, I guess, razor you can call it, but as long as you flip this over and then use the right angle, you can get around certain spots. So such as around all these, stud openings right here. I was able to take this and just carefully scrape this, but I think it's turned out pretty well. Obviously, jam your openings with some rags and whatnot so no debris gets inside while you're doing this operation. So I went ahead and saved this last area so I can show you the effectiveness of what Goof Off and the putty knife and this flat X-Acto will do. Hopefully I don't have to use this, but we'll see. So let me go ahead and show you what's going on. Okay, now we need to put the thermostat housing assembly onto the block. And we need to make sure that this new O-ring right here is going to fit snugly into this slot right here. So first things, we need to remove the 12mm bolts that are left in place so I wouldn't misplace those. And just another suggestion of mine, whenever you're working on an engine or a car or a boat or something with a lot of nuts and bolts, what I like to do is when I take a part off, I like to put the bolts or nuts back in position. That way I know exactly where things go. I'm not left with a bowl or bucket of nuts and bolts that are a mystery of where they belong to. So just a little helpful hint of mine. Okay, I can't stress how important these cam retainer bolts are. These are 9 foot-pounds, so do not over torque those. Those long bolts can easily snap, so remember 9 foot-pounds on that. Okay, I thought I had all this assembly all squared away with the new O-rings in this location right here. And in the thermostat assembly itself, there's 2 new O-rings, and this thing was very tight to put on. All right, so I was scanning through Instagram today, and a guy by the name of Montez, he's got a great Instagram page, and he's doing an H22 on his Accord that I guess he blew up, and he's redoing it. But anyways, he's got a lot of issues here with coolant leaking right here. So you've got an O-ring in this location, and that O-ring can actually slip over, I guess, the little lip that's inside there. And I remember how tight this was pushing in there, so I talked to him, and he said go ahead and maybe put some oil in there and kind of oil up the O-ring and put some oil on the actual inlet right here. That way it'll slide in a lot easier and lock it in and have less chance for the O-ring to overlap on that lip. And same thing on this side. I'm gonna put a little bit of oil on the O-ring and a little bit of oil on the opening so this thing can slide right in a lot easier. So I need to just pull off this outlet assembly and then take this 12mm back off, and this pipe will be able to just slide right out of here. And then we'll go ahead and take those precautions because we don't want any coolant leaking from this thing. So that's the whole purpose of redoing all the seals in this motor. So let's go ahead and pull this All right, got everything reassembled with this coolant tube right here. Originally I had the O-ring in there and this was very tough to put in, and there was some concern of the O-ring slipping over the little lip that's on this tube right here. Same situation on the thermostat housing. So what I did is I took my finger, put some little oil in there and just wiped the inside opening. Same thing, wiped the O-ring that's on the tube. I was able to slide things in, and this thing slid in. It was still a little snug, but it went in much easier than it was initially. So I know this thing is seated properly now. So major props to Montez, which is your grandma's four-door on Instagram. Hilarious guy, go ahead and give him a follow. Very useful tips for H22. He seems to be the H22 master. So got everything all put together, torqued everything down here on the thermostat assembly. And same thing with these two bolts on top here, 9 foot-pounds, and 9 foot-pounds with these 12 millimeters right here on the thermostat assembly. And now we can move on. Yeah, we got the engine stand and engine hoist in position. So let me show you what's going on here. Okay, in between this engine mount plate and obviously the engine block, you can kind of see here, this is your rear main seal. And there's a plate on here that holds it in position. And then right down there on the bottom lip, we got a bad oil leak right there. So my plan of action was to flip this motor upside down on the stand and go ahead and replace the oil pan seal itself. But however, looking at this, the oil pan butts up to this rear main seal plate. All right, so what the plan of action is, I'm gonna put this engine down the ground carefully, obviously, and then I can take this plate off here, you know, with the bolts that are attached to the block itself, and then I'll be able to get some free access. All right, so once this thing is on the ground, I can go ahead and unbolt this plate, clean it up on the backside, because there is Honda bond that butts up to the block itself, and then obviously replace the rear main seal and put it back in position. And then we'll obviously replace the Honda bond that's on the bottom here that butts up to the oil pan itself. And I believe that there is a rubber gasket moon shape here right on the bottom. So let's go ahead and carefully hoist this thing up and put this on the ground and go ahead and remove this plate here. Okay, the rear main seal plate is all removed. And I've done my best to clean off the old liquid gasket material using a dull putty knife, keyword being dull. You do not want to use a razor blade on aluminum especially, because it can gouge the aluminum, but putty knife is sturdy enough just to take off the old liquid gasket material. So what we'll do next is I'll take some brake cleaner and a rag and I'll wipe this thing down thoroughly. Same thing on the block here. I'll go ahead and take a rag, brake cleaner, spray a little bit here, and I'll just basically wipe this clean as much as possible. And the next step, we're gonna take our Honda Bond liquid gasket, and I'm gonna carefully line the edge here of the rear main seal plate. And then once I have the Honda Bond in place, I'll be able to take this plate and then push it into position. Now it's not gonna let you screw this thing up because there's little guide pins right here. So this little pin right here and this little pin right here. So that fits snugly in the block in this hole, in this hole. So the Honda engineers did not want any mechanics or do-it-yourselfers like us screwing this up. because you need to make that seal perfect. And then we'll torque this thing down to 9 foot-pounds, and then we'll be good to go. But first things first, before we do that, we're gonna go ahead and put the new rear main seal in the retainer. You can see there's a little lip right here. So we'll carefully put this in place. I'm gonna try like a rubber mallet and tap it in there, but you just gotta be careful not to damage the rear main seal. So that's a very important part of the motor here. Anyways, let's get this all taken care of now. Okay, rear main seal is now set in position on the rear main seal plate itself. Now I kept flipping this thing over and checking because there's a little lip right here, this piece of metal, and you want to make sure that this inside of the seal is touching this little metal lip right here. So you just need to keep flipping this thing over and seeing, you know, where you're at with things and whatnot. But, you know, just take your rubber mallet, you know, be gentle with this thing. You don't want to beat the crap out of this thing, and don't use a metal hammer. You know, you kind of want to massage this rear main seal into position. And it's kind of a good thing we got this plate removed, because we can kind of see of how it's seated in position right here. You know, seeing the back side of things. Because most of the times when rear main seals are replaced, basically they just take a metal pick and they poke a hole right here and they just pull it right off, and they'll just basically hammer the new one right in position. But now that we're doing this thing the right way, you know, with sealing everything up, we're able to see exactly of how this thing seats in position. So everything's looking good. It is all tight to the metal lip right there. So now the next step we're gonna do is we're gonna just basically take our Honda bond and we're gonna go all along the line of the perimeter here, around the screw holes. And then once that is all done, we can actually set it onto, you know, the block itself, and then torque those 10 millimeters down to 9 foot-pounds. So that is the next step of this process here. Okay, we've got success. We've got the new rear main seal plate installed using the Honda Bond liquid gasket. It was a little tough to squeeze, but you know, once you get the hang of it, you know, it'll come natural. Got this thing snug into place, tapped it a few times with the mallet around here, made sure it was seated right, and then I put a little bit of Honda Bond on each screw, you know, just for some more, you know, sealing capability. I don't think that it was recommended, but someone on YouTube did that tactic, so it can't hurt to do that. So anyhow, I took my electric ratchet and just kind of got each bolt snug on there, you know, just so I wasn't turning my ratchet, you know, a million times here. So I took my torque wrench and I tuned it to 5 foot-pounds, and I started out here in the middle, went from this side and this side, and then down here and down here, here, et cetera, et cetera. You kind of want to just, you know, seat this thing left and right as you're torquing this thing down. You don't want to just go, you know, 5 foot-pounds all on this side, and then 5 foot-pounds on this side. And then after this was done, I tuned it to 9 foot-pounds on the torque wrench. Did the same tactic, you know, one over here, one over here, one over here, one over here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a tactic my father taught me working on vehicles, is to make sure things are seated. You know, you don't go heavy on one side and then heavy on the other side. You kind of just want to, you know, rock the thing in position, as you could say. But it looks like I see a little bit of seepage of the liquid gasket. That's totally normal. That's a good thing. That means you put enough gasket material on here. So this stuff says it will you know, got different curing speeds, but it's humid out there. I mean, it's 98 degrees, I think, and real field temperature about 107. So it was real hot. So sun's going down right now, so it's not as bad working in the garage as it was yesterday. So, all right, so the curing speed indicates here on the instructions at 15 to 16 hours, it'll turn into like a rubber-like consistency, and then 3 days is full curing time. So I think we're just gonna go ahead and let this engine hang out here for a little bit, and then tomorrow night we'll reattach it to the hoist and we'll put it back on the stand, and then I'll flip this thing upside down and we'll do the oil pan seal. So things are coming along here on this maintenance of this H22. Okay, first things first, on the removal of this oil pan is we need to remove this transmission bracket that's mounted on the back side of the motor, and that's held in position by 3 14 millimeters. One right here, one right there, and another one right there. And then once this bracket comes off straight up, then you've got access to every single 10 millimeter that's on the perimeter of this oil pan right here. So let's go ahead and remove this bracket and the oil pan itself. Okay, all the nuts and bolts have removed from the oil pan. Now, I was doing an inspection here of how to actually pry this apart, and you don't want to gouge in between the metal surfaces, because you could basically put a gouge right there in the aluminum, because I mean, this is very soft material. So it looks like the manufacturer has put a indentation lip right here towards the front of the motor by the crankshaft area. So you see this little lip, and there's a little gap between the block and the pan. So you want to put your pry bar right here, and you want to twist. And once you twist, you'll start separating that liquid gasket. So that's the approach we're going to take here. That's probably the safest method of removing this oil pan, instead of trying to, you know, gouge this thing on the block and the oil pan. That is a big no-no, so don't do that. So we're going to go here on the front where the manufacturer probably intended to pry this. Stick our pry bar in here, twist it, and it should pop off. So cross my fingers. Let's go ahead and get this off. Okay, success in removing this oil pan. Instead of taking the pry bar and twisting, I basically just put it between the block and the oil pan and actually pushed down, and it actually popped off the liquid gasket. And as you can see here, some liquid gasket material here left from the factory. I mean, this is just basically how the 97 to 01 Prelude H22 engines are sealed. Now, if you have a 92 to 96 Prelude H22, that oil pan seal has actually a rubber gasket. So that's one of the main differences between the 97 to 01 and 92 to 96 H22s. All right, so remember, liquid gasket for 97 to 01 H22s and rubber gasket for 92 to 96 H22s. So we're gonna go ahead and remove as much excess liquid gasket as we can. I'm gonna go ahead and use my putty knife because it's nice and dull and it's got a sturdy surface. You can use a plastic scraper or whatever you want to use, but do not use a razor blade. So you can see a little piece right there, and be careful not to get anything in that engine. So as you can see here, this piece is already peeling, so I'm gonna grab this and see if I can just peel it away, but it's working out pretty good. Look at that. So just go ahead and discard that. And same thing on the oil pan. I'm gonna go ahead and just clean the edges up as best we can. And obviously before we put the new sealant in place, we're gonna take some brake parts cleaner and a rag and really wipe this clean. But you know, as you can see, here's some of the excess gasket material. It's just peels right off. Sometimes it'll peel off real easy. And then I see there's a little bit of some oil or maybe some sludge buildup. So I'm gonna take a paper towel and wipe this oil pan clean as best I can. And we also need to replace this half moon seal that sets right here in position. And that is the area that I was not able to properly seal when I was doing the rear main seal. Let me show you why. So here's the bottom plate of the rear main seal. You can kind of see where it meets up at the block right there. Same thing right here. Now, in order for me to properly seal this, you know, obviously you put the liquid gasket on there all the way around the perimeter and it goes straight down. It'll make a perfect seal. But if I were to just try to do this rear main seal plate and then try and put sealer right there and then push it this way, the tolerances are so tight, it would basically just scrape off all the liquid gasket that's right there, and you'd be in a world of hurt right there after you've reinstalled this engine. So you just gotta take this precautionary measure while doing the rear main seal and the seal plate. So just do things right. Okay guys, I messed up. I put way too much liquid gasket here on the oil pan and block, and it just seeped out as I torqued it down to spec, and it's just too much. And I'm just concerned that some of the seepage went into the crankcase itself, and if that occurred, that stuff could break loose, get caught up in the oil pickup and jam up the oil pump, which would then fry this engine. So I'd rather just be safe than sorry, and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So I'm basically just have to take this transmission bracket back off, take the oil pan, crack it open and see what we got. But I'm gonna have to re-clean this thing up and reseal it. But lesson learned, don't put too much liquid gasket on there, because once this oil pan goes in place, that stuff seeps out. You want a little bit of seepage, but not like I had here before. I mean, I was wiping this stuff with a paper towel and I don't know, it just didn't feel right when I was doing this. But, you know, lesson learned, just do it the right way, and, you know, don't be overzealous on the liquid gasket. All right, this is all torqued down, 5 foot-pounds and then 9 foot-pounds. And then I went ahead and went all around every single bolt just to make sure it's secure. So we have a little bit of seepage, but if you would have seen what happened last time, it was just really oozing out. So I guess I'm not a perfect oil pan sealer per se, but you know, I can live with that. I think that's not bad. I believe what I did on this area, I think I went towards the outside a little bit. So obviously most of the stuff is gonna come out the outside. And I got a little heavy around actually where the studs are at. So I went around both sides just to make sure that's all sealed up. And it looks like it's a little heavy on that side, but you know, you wanna have it looking like this. So that's perfect right there. You know, that's good right there. That's a little bit too much. That's a little bit too much. And it's just a tad bit too much right there. You know, you kind of get the idea a little bit. So there it is, oil pan is all sealed up. Go ahead and put the transmission bracket back in place and torque it. And we'll go ahead and flip this motor upside right, and we'll get ready for the next step on this motor. Okay, on the back side of the H22, there is a sensor right here. The connector broke off while I was disconnecting the harness. So this takes a 24mm to remove this sensor right here. Here's the part number for that sensor replacing on the back side of the H22. right below the intake manifold. So as you can see here, here's the remnants of the sensor from the removal of the engine harness. And this is the brand new one right here. So we'll be using a 24mm to reattach this. If you've got a deep socket, that helps out a lot, or you can use a wrench. So let's go ahead and reinstall this before we get the intake manifold back into position. Here's a video clip of the first attempt doing the oil pan with the Honda Bond liquid gasket. As you can see, there's a lot of excess gasket seeping out the sides. That's something you definitely don't want. And here is basically what was on the inside of the oil pan facing on the inside of the engine case, even though it was still stuck to the oil pan. But if this thing were to get dislodged somehow or another, this thing could have jammed up the oil pickup and just basically fried this engine. So it's just not a chance I want to take. So better safe than sorry. Okay, let me go ahead and give you guys a summary of all the work that's been done on this episode in case I've missed any steps. We went ahead and replaced the thermostat by opening up the thermostat assembly. We then replaced the O-ring that contacts the backside of the thermostat assembly. There's rubber O-rings that are inside here, and I had to actually put some oil on there and oil on the opening, thanks to Montez, his recommendation of making sure it's sealed up. Same thing on the opposite side of the motor. You've got rubber O-rings on this coolant tube that runs from the backside of the water pump all the way over here to the thermostat assembly. Just make sure that you put a little bit of oil in the opening, a little bit of oil in the O-ring. This is the knock sensor. This was broken upon removal of the wiring harness itself, so this is replaced. Replace these rubber lines with silicone lines from the silicone hose kit, and this basically cools down the oil. Also, we removed this intake manifold and carefully removed all the paper gasket material that was left over. Removed the oil pan, cleaned all the mating surfaces, used liquid gasket Honda Bond, and joined everything together and retorqued it using the torque sequencing. Big thank you to Gavin up in Canada for the recommendation to go ahead and redo it, because the first go around, too much was seeping out. Went ahead and reopened it up, and there was a lot of liquid gasket material that seeped inside towards the crankcase. Rear main seal plate was removed. Main surfaces were cleaned up. Honda Bond liquid gasket applied. Rear main seal was replaced while the plate was off. And we'll go ahead and continue the journey of all the H22 maintenance aspects before we go ahead and drop it back into CB9. In regards to the intake manifold, all we did is remove the fuel rail and fuel injectors from the H22. We swapped on our F22 fuel rail. We added 92 to 96 H22 VTEC fuel injectors and reused the fuel regulator from the H22. And I'm not sure if I'm gonna put this back on the motor until it goes back in the car, but we'll see what happens with the wiring situation and clearance issues and whatnot. All right, I apologize if today's video is a bit lengthy. I didn't want to leave any details out, so I hope this benefited you guys when you do your H22 swaps. So let me know if you got any questions. All right, guys, this summarizes the second installment of the H22 preparation for Project CB9. We were able to get a lot accomplished, including the rear main seal, intake manifold modifications, oil pan seal, among some other miscellaneous items. Now on the next episode, we're going to go ahead and tackle the timing components of the H22. I hope you guys can tune along for that. If you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.